Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, December 9th, 2021, and today we're going to be taking a look at three new polling races in the states of Minnesota, Nevada, and Texas, where we are looking at the governor elections that are going to be up in just about a year from now. Now, in all three of these races that have been polled, we have some very notable candidates running on both sides. In Minnesota, you have a bunch of Republicans that are looking to oust the incumbent governor, Tim Walz. In the state of Nevada, Dean Heller, the former United States Senator and United States Representative from the state, is now running for governor. It looks like he's turning to the next statewide office, which of course is running against Steve Sisolak, the incumbent Democratic governor. And in the state of Texas, Greg Abbott is now facing off against Beto O'Rourke, a 2018 Senate nominee, 2020 presidential contender, and now running for governor of the state of Texas. So looking at our three new sets of polls, we have different pollsters in all three of these races. In Nevada governorship, we have the Trafalgar group, so we'll take that into consideration when we take a look at some of these numbers. In the state of Texas, we have Quinnipiac University, and in the Minnesota governor's race, we have Survey USA. Now, Survey USA, I would say, is about, I think, a B+, A- rated pollster. Quinnipiac is typically B+, and the Trafalgar group actually has an A rating. Now, taking a look at historical accuracy, sometimes the Trafalgar group is accurate and sometimes they are not. And it is important to know, sometimes they could be completely off the mark. And we'll talk about that once we actually take a look at these states individually. The first one we're going to be taking a look at is the Texas governor's race, because this one honestly has the least amount of implications, as the state itself and Greg Abbott doesn't seem to be in the most competitive position, at least for 2022. And the reason why I say that is because in the 2020 presidential election, Texas still voted for Donald Trump by a margin of 5.6%, despite Joe Biden being approved of by about 7 points more than he was disapproved of nationally speaking. Donald Trump was still able to win. And if you look at the national numbers, Joe Biden was able to win the popular vote by a margin of 4.5%. So if you return to a position in which the Republican Party wins the popular vote, as they are expected by this new generic ballot number, you're going to see that the Democratic Party is going to perform worse in a bunch of states that they still lost in the 2020 election. And I think Texas is included. And you see that in these polls from the Dallas Morning News, University of Texas / Texas Tribune, Rice University, and Quinnipiac University. One thing they all conclude is that Greg Abbott wins re-election against Beto O'Rourke. The only person who was actually beating Greg Abbott was Matthew McConaughey. And after Beto O'Rourke announced his bid for governor, he announced that he was not going to be running for governor. McConaughey stepped back and said he won't be forming any type of bid for the state of Texas. And I think maybe that was a response to Beto O'Rourke running. Typically speaking, an independent would never overcome a Democrat and a Republican, especially if that base that the independent was grabbing from was primarily from the Democratic Party. So I think that with Beto O'Rourke's entrance into the race, that might have prevented McConaughey from running, but I don't think that was the sole reason why he decided not to run. But that's besides the point. As you can see in this new poll that was taken between the December 2nd and December 6th, Greg Abbott maintains a 15-point lead over Beto O'Rourke. And I find this to be not necessarily the perfect margin. I don't think this is going to be the actual and eventual margin, but I do think it tells us something. I think it certainly tells us there's a considerable portion of this state that is fine voting for Greg Abbott, but not fine voting for Beto O'Rourke. One thing is consistent about Beto O'Rourke. He remains in the high 30s and one time hit 42%. For Greg Abbott, he's gone from a low of 43 to now 52% across the state. People are more comfortable with Greg Abbott than they are Beto O'Rourke. And I think it largely has to do with the way that Beto O'Rourke treated the state of Texas, or more so the way he treated the presidential race. Because in 2018, when he ran for Senate against Ted Cruz, he was much more, I would say, of a moderate. While Beto O'Rourke does hold some pretty strong beliefs and has stuck through them, as we've seen with his decision on the issue of gun rights and buyback programs, Beto O'Rourke wasn't as, I would say, seemingly at least, outwardly saying, seemingly radical, more radically to the left. And I think that was something that kept Texas voters, those who were in the independent side, more on his side. And that's why Beto O'Rourke nearly ousted Ted Cruz. There were certainly a number of Republicans that voted for Ted Cruz. And the interesting thing is, the last time Greg Abbott was up for election was also 2018. And it shows you that now you're starting to see two strong contenders, but one did much better than the other. And that was Greg Abbott. On the same ballot that Beto O'Rourke was able to narrow down the Senate race to a margin of within 3 points, The governor's race went to Greg Abbott by a margin of 13.3%. Greg Abbott did well in Texas, much better than any other Republican across the state itself, and better than Romney did. Better than Trump did in 2016, better than McCain did in 2008, certainly better than Trump did in 2020. And ultimately, it tells you a lot about Greg Abbott because people have voted for him before. They've been fine with him as governor. People have voted for Abbott and O'Rourke. But when it comes down to them facing off against each other, because of what O'Rourke said in 2019 about how, yes, we are going to take your AR-15, huge gun state, Texas, it doesn't really make sense that he made that statement itself. But at that point in time, he was looking for, I think, a zinger on the national map, but that ultimately hurt him back home. And you can see that very clearly in this new Quinnipiac University poll. So what we know so far is that right now, Texas is probably going to be very solid for the GOP, and we are getting data to confirm and back up that point. We can now move into another state where the Republicans are also in the lead, at least according to the Trafalgar Group. Now, I don't know if, actually one thing I do want to say, I don't know if I've been pronouncing their name correctly. I believe it's Trafalgar or Trafalgar. I'm not entirely sure. Someone could correct me or at least inform me of what the correct pronunciation is. I was actually talking to Arnon Mishkin, the Fox News decision desk head, about this polling company itself, and he did say that I was pronouncing it incorrectly, but I wasn't able to figure out how to correctly pronounce it. But it doesn't really matter about how you pronounce the name of the polling company. The point is that they are right-leaning. And I actually want to take a look at the state of Nevada, because it does tell us a bit about what to expect for other races. So, looking at the final poll of the 2020 election season, you also saw the Trafalgar Group do a poll. And they found that Donald Trump was again in the lead by 1 point. Now, I say again because in 2016, the polling data said that Hillary Clinton was going to lose the state of Nevada. It said that Donald Trump was going to win by 1 point. And ultimately, as we've seen very consistently in election after election after election, that the polling data seems to always overestimate, in many cases, Republican support. In most cases, Republican support is overestimated in the state of Nevada. And that's true. Looking at 2012 even, you see here that the Real Clear Politics average had Obama up just 2.8%. He won by 6.7. 2008, you're looking at a similar story. The Real Clear Politics average said Obama was going to win Nevada by 6.5%. He won by 12.5. You see, the state of Nevada is overestimated in favor of Republicans based off of a lot of these polls, and the Trafalgar Group, I think, is no different. You can actually see this also in 2018. Let's see if we can go back to 2020 and look at what they deemed to be competitive races. I don't know if we'll be able to find it, but it also said in 2018 that Dean Heller, the Republican incumbent senator, was going to win that election, that Adam Laxalt, the Republican nominee for governor, was going to win that election. And you know what happened? Well, the race didn't go red. Neither of them did. And ultimately, the map looks how it is now, with blue on both sides. So I think that the Trafalgar Group certainly has some levels of concern for its overestimation of Republican support, but it wasn't that far off back in 2020. And that's the very interesting thing. Looking at the governor election now, they are saying that Dean Heller, the former senator and representative, is going to win by 7 points. Looking at that, I would say, no, I don't think it'll be 7 points, but it's not entirely impossible for Dean Heller to win at all. This race is going to be competitive. And if you look at the election in 2018, yes, it went to the Democratic Party, but it wasn't some type of landslide. Adam Laxalt and Steve Sisolak were against each other. Sisolak only won by 4.1%. So looking at the previous margins, looking at the way that the polling data is telling us the races right now, looking at our national numbers with Joe Biden disapproved of, with our generic ballot, I would say it makes sense that Dean Heller is up against Steve Sisolak, at least right now. But I don't think 7 points makes sense. But again, I am not trying to argue with this polling company. I am not trying to invalidate the findings of their survey. But I am going to say that we do need to acknowledge it has a rightward bias. In almost every election, Nevada overestimates Republican support, and I think that can certainly be applied to this one, especially with the Republican pollster doing it. So looking at the historical elections in the state of Nevada, we have Joe Biden winning in the state by 2.4%. Looking at 2016, we have Hillary Clinton winning by 2.4%. In the Senate election in 2016, we have Catherine Cortez Masto winning by 2.4%. I think you're starting to see a trend here. Democratic victories in Nevada typically aren't that large. Even in 2018, as I just showed you, Sisolak was only able to win by 4.1% under a national environment in which Democrats were winning by 8 points. In the Senate election in 2018, Jackie Rosen defeats Dean Heller by 5 points. That's actually one of the larger margins we've seen for a Democrat in the state of Nevada. And I think Nevada can be compared in a very similar way to the state of North Carolina, where there are always competitive elections, and there may be that one-off where the opposition party wins, but it typically goes for one party, and in this case, that is the Democratic Party. So right now, I think that this new poll captures the anti-Biden and anti-Democratic sentiment that we have seen all the way across this nation, and it's getting into the states where Democrats have some very strong candidates, an incumbent governor who used to be popular across the state. You have Beto O'Rourke, the best-performing Democrat in the Senate election in decades. So looking at that, Democrats still start to see themselves falling behind, mostly because the American public is angry with Joe Biden, and they're angry with the Democratic Party. And in the final poll, or final polls that we will take a look at, are a bunch of Survey USA numbers with Tim Walz as the Democratic nominee against varying nominees. Now, as we can see in this poll, and I'll open it up because it does hold a bit more interesting information, voters in the state of Minnesota are not necessarily happy with Joe Biden, but they are happy with Tim Walz. And we can take a look. Looking at the polls, they have a bunch of questions for the governorship, but let's see if we can find numbers on Joe Biden here. I believe they released some. If not, I can go ahead and check over on my phone here and just relay it to you. But the point and the main takeaway from those numbers was that Joe Biden currently in the state of Minnesota is about even in terms of overall numbers. Now, keep in mind, Minnesota voted blue by about 7 points in the 2020 election. So Joe Biden did pretty well in a state that Hillary Clinton only won by 1.5%. But let me go ahead and find some of these numbers. According to Survey USA, or actually Survey USA, and I believe there's one other pollster they worked with. I mentioned it right in the beginning of the video. It is, I guess, KSTV. Tim Walz's approval rating in this poll is 55%. The disapproval rating, 41%. That's plus 14 across the state. For Joe Biden, 48% in terms of approval, 48% in terms of disapproval. So Tim Walz is considerably outperforming Joe Biden. And if Joe Biden won Minnesota by 7 points, when he was up 7 points, if he's down to a negative point, you would expect the approval rating for us to be much worse. It isn't. And you would expect Tim Walz's numbers to be much worse. But when you see that plus 14 approval across the state, now you start to see why. Even though people might be upset with Joe Biden, even though people might be pushing back on him in other states, Minnesota does not seem to be one of those states. You can actually see this in a very similar fashion to the state of California. When Gavin Newsom was up for his recall election, there was a possibility that he was going to be recalled. At one point in time, the recall effort actually took the lead over the keep Gavin Newsom. And then ultimately, by the time we reached the final election, certified and all, Gavin Newsom performed better in the recall election than he did in 2018 when the national environment was on his side. And even when that recall election actually occurred, there was not necessarily the best numbers for Joe Biden or the Democrats. At that point in time, Joe Biden was still disapproved of across the nation. Yet somehow Democrats performed better. That's because the way that people stand on certain politicians matters the most. It isn't necessarily the national environment. As we saw in 2018, there were plenty of elections on the governor map that didn't really make much sense. Even though this was a Democratic wave year, Republicans won Maryland, Massachusetts, Vermont, all states that Democrats went on to win by over 30 points 2 years later. Republicans were able to win New Hampshire. They were able to win Arizona. They were able to win many of these states where Democrats were doing very well in House elections and Senate elections, right? And looking at the Senate elections, you also have things that simply did not make sense because of the way that voters liked these politicians. Montana went blue. West Virginia went blue. Mississippi was decided by single digits in a Senate election. And that's because voters had positive views of these nominees, had positive views of these incumbents. And that's what's happening in this state. So while I have, I would say now, incorrectly characterized Minnesota as a tilt D, sometimes, fluctuating back and forth state, I think that now it is fair to assume that Democrats are going to perform better than I previously thought in the state. Which makes sense, makes total sense with Tim Walz right now across the map because he's currently approved of. I had it as tilt Republican in my most recent projection on the governor map, and I would say that is 100% wrong now, and I stand by that. Tim Walz has proven to be someone who is outperforming Biden, has done better in years past, and will likely do well in 2022 at this rate. Even in 2018, Tim Walz was able to defeat his Republican opponent by 11.5%. That is very impressive. And now seeing these numbers, I see why Tim Walz is expected to win re-election and why he is at a very powerful position across the state. Because as we've seen in states that were more left-leaning than Minnesota was in the 2020 election, even them have decided to shift over. New Jersey, right? Virginia did go to the GOP. New Jersey was nearly there. But Minnesota doesn't seem to be putting us that way. So all around, main takeaways here, Republicans up in Texas and Nevada, but they're down in Minnesota. And I think that tells you a bit about where some of these coalitions have remained, about how popular approval of a governor and individual candidates is much more important than any type of national environment. Of course, the national environment holds a lot of merit and a lot of weight, but there still is some impact, and a pretty considerable one, of a popular incumbent and the factor of the incumbency altogether. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.